The sterile smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the maternity ward, blending with the quiet beeping of monitors and the soft murmur of nurses moving from room to room. Outside the large window, the city continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that inside these walls a small human life had just begun, and that a much larger conflict was about to reach its breaking point. The young woman lay pale and exhausted on the hospital bed, her newborn sleeping beside her, wrapped tightly in a pastel blanket. Her eyes were full of fear and disbelief as she watched the door swing open once more. Her mother-in-law entered with rigid posture and cold determination, heels clicking sharply against the floor. From the very beginning, she had made it clear that this child was not welcome, at least not under the circumstances she deemed acceptable. She believed her son's life had been derailed, that the marriage had been a mistake, and that the newborn symbolized everything she had failed to control. Without lowering her voice, she accused the young mother of trapping her son, of being irresponsible, of bringing shame rather than joy. Each word landed like a blow, echoing harshly in the small room. "You don't belong here," the older woman snapped, gesturing toward the door. "Pack your things. You and your baby will leave today." Nurses froze in the hallway, sensing the tension but uncertain whether to intervene. The new mother's hands trembled as she instinctively pulled the blanket closer around her child, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She was weak, vulnerable, and completely unprepared for this confrontation, especially in a place that was meant to offer safety and care. The argument escalated quickly. The mother-in-law spoke of lawyers, of family reputation, of how her son would be better off without this burden. She insisted that arrangements had already been made, that the young woman should go back where she came from. The words, abandoned, and unwanted, cut especially deep, carving wounds that would not heal easily. It seemed as though nothing could stop her, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind and now intended to see it through to the end. Then, unexpectedly, the door opened again. This time, the atmosphere changed instantly. A tall figure stepped inside, calm yet commanding, his presence alone enough to silence the room. The mother-in-law turned sharply, ready to unleash more anger, but the words died in her throat. Her face drained of color, her confident stance faltering as recognition set in. Standing there was someone she had not anticipated, someone whose authority and influence made her threats suddenly feel small and reckless. The guest spoke quietly at first, but every word carried weight. He reminded her where she was, that this was a hospital, not a courtroom or a battlefield. He spoke of compassion, of boundaries, and of the law, making it clear that forcing a recovering mother and newborn out of a medical facility was not just cruel, but illegal. The nurses, emboldened by his presence, moved closer, and the balance of power shifted decisively. The mother-in-law tried to protest, to reclaim control, but her voice wavered. For the first time, she seemed unsure. When she attempted one last insult, the guest cut her off with a sharp, unmistakable warning. She was heading to the wrong station if she thought intimidation would get her what she wanted. The phrase hung in the air, final and humiliating. There would be no victory for her today. She stood there, speechless, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. Slowly, she turned and left the room without another word, the sound of her retreating footsteps a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. The young mother exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, relief flooding her exhausted body. The guest offered a reassuring nod before stepping out, leaving behind a sense of protection and calm. Elsewhere, on a brightly lit television set thousands of miles away, another confrontation was unfolding, one that would soon dominate headlines and social media feeds. The View's familiar panel sat around the table, the atmosphere tense as a heated discussion spiraled out of control. Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and unfiltered opinions, pressed her point aggressively, her voice rising as she challenged her guest. Johnny Depp sat across from her, composed but visibly frustrated. He had endured years of public scrutiny, misrepresentation, and relentless commentary, and tonight it was clear he had reached his limit. As Joy interrupted him repeatedly, dismissing his attempts to explain his perspective, the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no longer a spirited debate, it was an ambush. Finally, Depp leaned forward, his gaze steady and unflinching. When he spoke, the studio fell silent. He did not raise his voice or resort to insults. Instead, he dismantled the accusations calmly, pointing out contradictions, reminding the panel of facts that had been conveniently ignored. His words were precise, measured, and devastatingly effective. With each sentence, Joy's confident demeanor faltered, much like the mother-in-law's in the maternity ward. When Joy attempted to interrupt again, Depp held up a hand and finished his thought, asserting his right to speak and to be heard. The moment was electric. The audience erupted in applause, sensing they were witnessing a turning point. This was not just a celebrity defending himself, it was a man reclaiming his narrative after years of being spoken over. The parallels between the two confrontations were striking. In both cases, power had been wielded carelessly, used to intimidate and dominate rather than to protect or understand. And in both cases, that power had been checked, not through shouting or violence, but through calm authority and truth. The mother-in-law had believed she could dictate the fate of a vulnerable young woman, just as Joy Behar had assumed she could control the conversation without consequence. Both were proven wrong. By the end of the broadcast, clips of Depp's exchange were already circulating online, hailed by fans as a moment of long-overdue vindication. Viewers praised his restraint and clarity, contrasting it sharply with the aggressive tone he faced. Much like the silent maternity ward after the storm had passed, there was a sense that something had shifted, that a line had been drawn. Back in the hospital, the young mother watched her baby sleep, her heart still racing but finally at peace. She knew challenges lay ahead, legal battles, family fractures, uncertain futures, but she also knew she was not as alone as she had felt hours earlier. Someone had stepped in when she needed it most, reminding her that dignity and justice were not privileges reserved for the powerful. In two very different spaces, the same truth had revealed itself. Intimidation thrives in silence, but it collapses when confronted with courage and clarity. Whether in a hospital room or on live television, the moment someone refuses to be pushed out, refuses to head to the wrong station, everything changes. The maternity ward was supposed to be a place of quiet beginnings, where life entered the world gently and hope outweighed fear. Instead, tension pressed against the walls of the small hospital room like a gathering storm. The young woman lay propped against white pillows, her body aching, her emotions raw, her newborn resting beside her in fragile peace. She had imagined this moment so differently, soft smiles, whispered promises, perhaps even reconciliation. What she received instead was judgment delivered with ruthless precision. Her mother-in-law arrived without warmth, without congratulations, without even a glance toward the sleeping child. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, already set on conflict. She spoke as if delivering a verdict, not addressing a woman who had just given birth hours earlier. According to her, mistakes had been made, reputations damaged, futures ruined. The baby, she implied, was not a blessing but a complication. The words came fast and cutting, leaving no room for defense. She demanded that the young mother leave the hospital immediately. She claimed the family would not support her, that her son wanted nothing to do with this situation, that everything would be easier if she simply disappeared. Each sentence stripped away another layer of dignity. The new mother felt herself shrinking under the weight of it, too weak to argue, too shocked to respond. Her only instinct was to protect her child, to hold on to the one thing in the room that felt unquestionably hers. Nurses hovered near the doorway, exchanging uneasy looks. They were trained to handle medical emergencies, not family cruelty disguised as authority. The mother-in-law seemed to sense their hesitation and pressed harder, her voice rising, her gestures more aggressive. She spoke of influence, of connections, of how easily she could make things official. The room felt smaller with every word. Then, without warning, the door opened again. The man who stepped inside did not rush or shout. He didn't need to. His calm presence alone disrupted the momentum of the attack. The mother-in-law turned, prepared to continue her tirade, but recognition struck instantly. Her expression changed so fast it was almost frightening, anger collapsing into disbelief, confidence draining into silence. This was not someone she could intimidate or dismiss. He spoke with quiet authority, reminding her that the hospital was governed by law, not personal grudges. He explained, carefully but firmly, that no one had the right to force a recovering mother or a newborn out of medical care. His words were measured, but there was steel beneath them. The nurses straightened, reassured. The young mother felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, relief. The mother-in-law attempted to interrupt, but the man stopped her with a single sentence that cut deeper than any insult. She was chasing control in the wrong place, heading toward consequences she clearly hadn't considered. The implication was unmistakable. For the first time since entering the room, she had nothing to say. She stood frozen, humiliated by her own overreach, before turning and leaving without another word. Silence followed, heavy but healing. The baby stirred softly. The young mother let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, tears finally falling, not from fear, but from release. Someone had seen what was happening and had chosen to intervene. Someone had drawn a line. Far away, under studio lights and television cameras, another confrontation unfolded, one built not on family ties but on public narrative and power. The Views panel was deep into a heated discussion, the tone sharper than usual. Joy Behar leaned forward, her questions pointed, her interruptions relentless. She framed her argument with confidence, speaking over her guest as if control of the conversation was already hers. Johnny Depp listened quietly at first, his expression restrained but tense. For years, he had watched his story be simplified, distorted, weaponized against him in headlines and soundbites. He had learned the cost of reacting emotionally, the danger of giving critics exactly what they expected. But as Joy continued to cut him off, dismissing his responses before they were finished, something shifted. When Depp finally spoke, the change was immediate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult or provoke. Instead, he slowed the conversation down. He insisted on being heard. He addressed each accusation calmly, dismantling assumptions with facts and lived experience. His words were not theatrical, they were deliberate. The studio audience fell silent, sensing that the balance of power had changed. Joy attempted to regain control, interrupting again, but Depp held his ground. He reminded her, and everyone watching, that conversation requires listening, not domination. The applause that followed was spontaneous and loud, cutting through the tension like a release valve. For a moment, the show's usual rhythm was gone, replaced by something raw and unscripted. The similarity between the two scenes was impossible to ignore. In both cases, someone had assumed authority gave them the right to silence another person. In both cases, that assumption collapsed the moment it was challenged with calm resolve. The mother-in-law believed her status entitled her to dictate a vulnerable woman's future. Joy Behar believed her platform allowed her to control the narrative. Both encountered resistance they hadn't anticipated. As clips of the interview spread online, reactions poured in. Viewers praised Depp's composure, calling the moment long overdue. Many noted how rare it was to see someone refuse to be talked over without resorting to anger. The exchange resonated because it reflected a broader frustration: how often voices are dismissed, especially when they don't fit a convenient story. Back in the hospital, the young mother stared at her child's tiny fingers, curling instinctively around hers. The fear hadn't vanished completely. She still faced uncertainty, difficult conversations, and a future that looked nothing like what she'd planned. But something fundamental had changed. She had learned that silence was not her only option, that intimidation could be challenged, even when she felt weakest. Both moments carried the same quiet lesson. Power loses its grip when it is exposed, when someone refuses to be pushed out, spoken over, or erased. Whether in a hospital room or on live television, the act of standing firm, without cruelty, without chaos, can shift everything. The mother-in-law left believing she had lost control. Joy Behar moved on to the next segment, but the moment lingered. And in both cases, the people who had been targeted walked away with something far more valuable than victory. They walked away with their voice intact, their dignity restored, and the knowledge that no matter how intimidating the setting, no one has the right to decide their place or tell them they're heading to the wrong destination.